Why is it that we can forget an entire conversation, yet still remember a single smile from it years later? It's one of the strangest contradictions of being human. We spend our lives wrapped in words, talking, texting, writing, remembering, but in the end, the moments that stay with us are often silent. A glance, a hug, a subtle gesture of kindness when we needed it most. People forget what was said in moments of comfort, yet never forget how someone made them feel. Why? Why does the warmth of a smile linger in the brain, while the very sentences spoken fade like smoke? Is it simply emotional memory, the brain tagging feelings more strongly than facts? Or is it something more intricate, visual, memory, social instinct? Or perhaps something deeper still, a kind of neural storytelling, where emotion becomes the author and the mind edits out all but the most important parts? Back in the 1990s, researchers studying patients with Alzheimer's in a quiet retirement home stumbled upon something puzzling. These patients couldn't remember their own children's names, their faces, conversations, even identities lost. But when those same children smiled at them, something flickered. Some patients smiled back. Others relaxed, softened, even lit up. They didn't remember who these people were, but they remembered how they felt around them. The joy, the safety, the love. Not as facts, but as sensations, as presence. It's enough to make you ask, what is memory really? Is it a record of events like a tape? Or is it a story, fragile, fragmented, constantly rewritten, anchored by emotional highlights rather than complete narratives? And if that's true, what happens when those highlights are completely wordless? This isn't just about the mysteries of memory. It's about what really lasts, what survives time, trauma, and even the breakdown of the brain itself. And in that survival, there's a message. Maybe the most important moments in life aren't the ones we can quote, but the ones we can feel. From the moment we're born, before we understand language, we understand faces. A newborn, just hours old, will fixate longer on a human face than on any other shape. And not just any face, a smiling one. Long before a baby knows what a word means, it knows what a smile means. This isn't learned behavior. It's biology. It's deep wiring. We are built to read faces. Embedded in the architecture of our brain are dedicated circuits, particularly in the fusiform gyrus for facial recognition. It's how we identify family, detect threat, connect with community. But even more than recognizing who someone is, we read how they feel. When someone smiles at us, our brain doesn't just observe the expression, it feels it. Mirror neurons, the social mimics in our brain, activate when we witness an emotion in someone else. A smile seen is a smile echoed. It creates a sort of emotional resonance that our brain stamps into memory, not as a sentence, but as a feeling. This emotional imprinting isn't new. In fact, history shows we've always known, intuitively or explicitly, that how something is expressed often matters more than what is said. In ancient Greece, orators weren't just trained in the art of rhetoric, the crafting of persuasive arguments, they were also trained in how to perform those arguments. Tone, facial expression, posture. A speech wasn't just about logic, it was about presence. Aristotle's rhetoric emphasized pathos, emotional appeals, a core pillar of persuasion. Because even thousands of years ago, humans understood feelings last longer than facts. Today, that truth is more relevant than ever. In the digital age, we're drowning in words, tweets, texts, posts, blogs, but the things that go viral, The things that stick in our minds, they're rarely paragraphs. They're faces, expressions, a snapshot of someone crying in joy or laughing in surprise, a silent video of a child reuniting with a parent, an old man smiling at a photo. These moments break through the noise not because they explain, but because they move, and what's moving is remembered. Even in therapy, one of the most word-dependent professions, clients often report that they don't recall what their therapist said, but they remember how the therapist made them feel. Safety, warmth, presence, a particular look of empathy across the room. The words blur, the feeling stays. We live in a culture that encourages us to say the right thing. We rehearse apologies, memorize speeches, and script texts, all in the hope of delivering the perfect sentence. But neuroscience suggests we may be aiming at the wrong target. The human brain isn't a tape recorder. It doesn't keep every word we hear. It tags and saves what mattered, what stood out, and most often, that means what felt emotionally important. This leads us to an emerging idea in neuroscience and psychology, known as emotional residue theory, the notion that our memories are not stored by detailed content, but by emotional salience. In other words, the brain bookmarks moments not by their verbal meaning, but by their emotional weight. The more something feels, the more it sticks. That's why a vague compliment can stay with us for decades, while a detailed lecture fades in days. Why a single look from someone we love can outlast 1,000 conversations. Our brains are not built for perfect recollection. They're built for meaningful recollection. And meaning, for the brain, often comes through emotion, not language. This light memory begins to look less like a database and more like a highlight reel, a story told in feelings, told by the body, curated not by logic but by resonance. And in that story, smiles and all the moments they represent aren't just cosmetic expressions. They're anchors, neural lighthouses, signals that say, this mattered. In 2004, a groundbreaking study in neuroscience quietly reshaped our understanding of memory, but few people noticed. Researchers investigating the amygdala, the brain's emotional memory hub, uncovered a subtle but profound twist. Facial expressions, particularly emotional ones like smiles or frowns, triggered longer-lasting activity in the hippocampus, the region tied to long-term memory, than spoken words did. In simple terms, the emotional look on someone's face left a deeper imprint on memory than anything they said. This wasn't just a curious side note, it was a challenge to a foundational belief in how humans remember, communicate, and make sense of their lives. The experiment itself was deceptively simple. Subjects were shown a series of faces paired with spoken or written phrases. Some faces smiled gently while delivering neutral sentences like, I went to the store. Others appeared sad or angry while delivering passionate, inspiring messages, things that on the surface should have been more memorable. Weeks later, the participants were asked what they remembered. The results were striking. People didn't recall the words. They barely registered the content of the speech. What they remembered, what their brains had kept, was the expression on the face, the smile, the sadness, the feeling, not the facts. This discovery introduced a quiet dilemma, one that lingers in both science and everyday life. If our memory system naturally privileges emotional signals over language, what does that say about our deep cultural faith in words? We build relationships on conversations. We apologize with careful phrasing. We document history through speeches and testimonies. But what if, Despite all that effort, the words don't really stick. What if what endures is not what we said, but how we made someone feel? That's where the dilemma deepens, because it calls into question the trustworthiness of our own memories. If memory is emotionally biased, it's also malleable. Emotional salience can distort, exaggerate, or erase details that don't align with the feeling. So when we say, "I remember exactly what happened," what we may really mean is, "I remember how it felt." And that is a dangerous simplification. It opens the door to conflicting truths, to broken narratives, to historical misunderstanding. Two people can experience the same event but walk away with different emotional residues, therefore different memories. So what are we to trust? The language or the feeling? In a world that leans so heavily on verbal communication, this twist in memory science invites us to rethink what really lasts and what really matters. Because in the end, it may not be what we say that survives. It may be the unspoken moments, the look, the presence, the emotion. And those, for better or worse, are harder to measure but impossible to forget. As the science unfolds, the questions begin to multiply and they strike at the very heart of how we understand ourselves. If memory is shaped more by emotion than by fact, then how much of our personal history is a story built on feelings rather than objective events? Are we curating a life narrative not from what truly happened, but from how each moment felt in the moment it occurred? This conflict between memory and reality introduces a tension that runs through law, history, relationships, and even our sense of self. Eyewitness testimony, long trusted in courtrooms, becomes fragile under this lens. A witness might not remember what someone said, only that they seemed angry or kind or frightening. The emotional flavor of an encounter can color the entire recollection, altering details, omitting facts, even fabricating impressions. A smile can transform a threat into perceived safety. A frown can cast innocence into doubt. Memory, it seems, is not evidence, it's interpretation. We can see this strange hierarchy of emotional memory even in our collective cultural icons. Take the Mona Lisa. Her expression has transfixed viewers for over 500 years. Why? It's not because we know what she was thinking or what words she spoke. It's because her smile, the ambiguous, gentle, possibly knowing smile, lingers. It speaks without language, and yet it stays with us, triggering something primal in our brain's emotional circuitry. And this is not confined to art. Survivors of historical trauma, like the Holocaust, have reported remembering not just the horrors, but oddly, the subtleties, like the chilling calmness of a smiling guard, that one facial expression can carry. More emotional weight and memory durability than entire days of chaotic suffering. In the human brain, emotional contrast is what endures. The modern implications are even more unsettling. Politicians are now trained not just in rhetoric, but in expression management, learning when to smile, when to pause, how to modulate their face to maintain emotional control over a crowd. The science shows it works. We trust people who smile, even when their words are questionable. We're biologically inclined to believe a pleasant face over a conflicting message. And now, with artificial intelligence capable of analyzing micro-expressions, we are on the verge of being able to decode authentic smiles from social or manipulative ones. The question becomes, are we finally learning to detect emotional lies, or are we just building new tools to exploit our emotional memory even further? All of this leads to a deeper philosophical tension. If emotion is more powerful than language in the shaping of memory, then what does that say about truth? itself is emotional truth, how something felt more real, more impactful than objective truth. Can a painful feeling override a logical explanation? Can a sense of betrayal outlive a perfectly worded apology? The answer, according to neuroscience, seems to be yes. And that's not just theoretical. In romantic relationships, friendships, even workplace dynamics, miscommunications often arise not from what is said, but from what is felt between the lines. Someone says, "I love you," but the smile is forced. Someone says, "I'm fine," but the tone is clipped and the eyes are distant. The words say one thing, the emotion says another, and the memory, it follows the feeling, not the phrase. So, where does that leave us? If we can't fully trust language, and we can't always trust memory, then perhaps the most honest parts of communication are the ones we least control. Our faces, our feelings, our presence. These things, it turns out, are what truly last. They write the silent record that our brains keep long after the conversation ends. And that record shapes not only how we remember others, but how we are remembered ourselves. Here's the deeper twist, one that reframes everything. We thought we knew about memory. Our brains were never designed to store facts. They were designed to help us survive. Memory isn't a neutral archive of truth. It's a filtering system, forged by evolution to prioritize what matters most for staying alive. And what mattered most, over hundreds of thousands of years, wasn't always what someone said, it was what their face signaled. A smile meant safety. A calm expression meant approachability. An angry scowl, a cold stare, a flash of fear, these were cues that could mean danger, deception, or death. And so, the brain evolved to pay closer attention to faces than to words, to store emotional signals more deeply than linguistic content, to remember what could help us navigate people, tribes, threats, alliances. It was never about truth, it was about relevance. That one insight changes the entire narrative. The reason we remember smiles more than speeches isn't because we're irrational or overly sentimental. It's because we're human. Because for our ancestors, reading the emotional state of someone in the dark before they spoke could mean the difference between inclusion and exile, between trust and betrayal. A smile wasn't just a nicety, it was a survival mechanism, a biological green light. So while words became more complex over time, the emotional undercurrent, the signal behind the signal, remained the more powerful communicator. Our brains treat language like raw data, but they treat emotion like a warning label or a beacon, and the evidence runs deeper still. In studies of people who are blind from birth, a similar pattern emerges. Though they cannot see faces, they can hear emotion. They recognize smiles not through sight, but through tone of voice, laughter, breath, and their emotional memory still favors these auditory cues over words. A kind voice, a moment of laughter, a tone of reassurance. These are remembered long after the actual words fade. Even in complete silence, even without visual input, emotion is still stored. The system persists because the function persists. Identify what matters emotionally and keep it. This is the climax of the story, the twist that binds everything together. Memory is not about preserving facts, it's about preserving meaning. Not meaning in the intellectual sense, but in the visceral, emotional, survival-driven sense. What helped us feel safe? Who made us feel seen? Where did we last experience connection, trust, or joy? These are the patterns the brain is wired to hold on to. These are the highlights that echo across decades. In the end, we are not data-driven creatures. We are signal-driven organisms, and a smile, fleeting, silent, powerful, is one of the oldest, clearest signals we've ever known today. Neuroscience has brought us to a place of clarity, though. It's a clarity that feels more emotional than mechanical. We now understand that emotional memories, especially those tied to facial expressions, are more durable because they activate multiple systems in the brain simultaneously. When we see someone smile, it's not just our visual cortex that lights up. Our amygdala, which processes emotion, becomes engaged. So does our motor cortex, because we subconsciously mimic the smile. This combination of perception, feeling, and action creates a kind of neural synergy. The moment becomes stickier, not because it's more logical, but because it's more embodied. Our entire nervous system participates in the memory, and the more systems involved, the more likely the memory is to be encoded deeply and retrieved effortlessly. This isn't just theory, it's shaping real-world practice. In Alzheimer's care, for example, patients often lose the ability to recall names, dates, or even their own identities. But caregivers have found that smiling family photos, especially those showing emotion, not just posed portrait scan, trigger powerful responses. The patients may not remember the person's name, but they respond to the feeling that the face evokes. In some cases, a smile can prompt a smile in return, or even open a window into long-forgotten stories. It's not the facts that bring the person back, it's the feeling. Marketers, too, have embraced the science, often more quickly than educators or therapists. Studies show that when people see a smiling person associated with a product, not only do they rate the product more positively, they remember it more clearly. The emotional association becomes a shortcut in the mind. Similarly, in classrooms around the world, a quiet revolution is taking place. Research shows that teachers who smile more, who convey warmth and sincerity with their expressions, are consistently remembered by their students as better educators even when the content of the lessons is forgotten. It's not just the material that matters, it's the emotional delivery. What does this mean for the rest of us outside of labs, classrooms, or hospitals? It means that to be remembered, we don't need to find the perfect words. We don't have to craft flawless arguments or deliver poetic speeches. We just have to mean it and let our face show it. A genuine smile, a flash of compassion, a look of understanding, these are the moments that endure. In relationships, in friendships, in fleeting encounters with strangers. It is not our vocabulary that lives on in others' minds, but our emotional authenticity. In a world increasingly obsessed with precision, scripting, and digital communication, this insight is profoundly humanizing, because it reminds us that being remembered isn't about perfection, it's about presence, about how we made someone feel, about the wordless signals that say, you mattered. One day, someone may forget your name. They may forget the stories you told, the advice you gave, even the time you spent sitting beside them. The hours, the sentences, the little daily ritual of it may quietly fade from their memory, like breath on a mirror. But what often remains, tucked deep within the folds of their mind, is the way your face looked when you smiled at them, the warmth in your eyes, the softness in your voice, the sense wordless but unmistakable that they mattered to you, that they were safe, that they were seen. These are the traces that endure, not because they are dramatic, but because they are emotionally true. So perhaps it's time to reframe the question. What if our legacy isn't written in the words we carefully choose, or the lessons we hope to pass down? What if it's etched instead into the emotional space we leave behind? into the quiet, unseen memories we plant in others when we offer them our presence fully, sincerely, and without performance. In a world overflowing with noise and language, what if the most honest thing we give another person is the feeling they get when they're with us? What if our smiles are the true stories we leave behind, more enduring than any speech, more meaningful than any script? Because in the end, maybe the most lasting thing we ever say is something we never said at all.